Hey there. What is up, friends? It is good to see you guys. Apologies right off the bat for the delay. We were dealing with a little bit of technical difficulties, but we seem to have gotten it figured out. And hey, welcome to the show, man. It is March 20th, 2019, and this is the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. I hope all you guys out there are having a wonderful start to your week. We appreciate you so much for joining us. And man, if today proved anything all over again, it is that there is never a dull moment in this crazy sport of ours. Breaking news this morning about, former UFC Bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw. As I am sure you have all heard by now, we will get into all the nitty-gritty of that today. But first, let me bring in my better half here. As always, I am joined by my guy, the hardest working man in the business, the California King himself, Mr. Marc Raimondi. What is up, buddy? It's been a slow morning so far, no?
Yeah, no big deal. Just, woke up, had a relaxing cup of coffee, had breakfast. No, I mean, I've been running around like a lunatic for the last few hours, dealing with this TJ Dillashaw thing. It's been a rough morning, but let's dive right in, Shaun. Let's dive right in.
Let's do that. There's a ton to discuss today, as you guys can imagine. We'll get to everything regarding this TJ Dillashaw situation, everything we know up to the moment in a second. But also, I mean, there is a lot else out there. The UFC's new pay-per-view deal with ESPN and what that means for the sport. It means a lot. It is a big deal. Jorge Masvidal's Wild Night in London, UFC Nashville, is this weekend with Anthony Pettis versus Stephen Thompson atop the card. All of that and more today. But as we always say, this is your guys' show, so we will talk about whatever you want us to talk about. You can ask us a question on the MMA fighting page below. Any question that gets 3 recommendations, those will turn green and get priority. Or you can ask us a question on the Twitter machine using the hashtags TheASide and chat wrappers. Replay the show goes up immediately following the end of it on YouTube. Also going to be up within a couple hours on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher. You know the drill. Wherever else you get your pods, it will be there. And hey, Marc, with that, let's dive in, man. There's a lot to talk about. Let's not waste any time. First question's coming from the MMA fighting page, and it's from GReb77. And you know what the topic is. TJ Dillashaw versus USADA. What to do with the bantamweight title. He writes, obviously it is still breaking news, but what do you make of the TJ Dillashaw-USADA situation? And if you link it with stories of TJ's times at Team Alpha Male and Sam Calavita, and what should not a little broken sentences here. And what should the UFC do with the vacant bantamweight title? Cejudo, Moraes, Munoz, Sterling, Cruz, Cody. Which bantamweight title fight do you prefer and why? So, Marc, there is obviously a lot to unpack here. So let's just start at the very beginning. We wake up this morning and TJ Dillashaw is no longer the bantamweight champion. He has relinquished his bantamweight title after being suspended 1 year by the New York Athletic Commission after USADA found adverse findings in his drug test regarding the UFC Brooklyn fight against Henry Cejudo. Immediate reaction.
Well, yeah, I mean, shocking, because this has not happened often to UFC champions. It's only happened a few times where a UFC champion has tested positive for a banned substance. And also worth noting, before we say anything further, Shaun, we don't know what this substance is yet. We have no idea what it is. We don't know if it was a PED. We don't know if it was a diuretic. We don't know if it was some kind of a hormonal agent, an anti-estrogen agent. We have no idea what it is yet. I think we can probably rule out marijuana. I don't think New York would have suspended him 1 year. And then that's another thing, too. The New York State Athletic Commission has suspended TJ Dillashaw 1 year and fined him $10,000 for this. And he said he was relinquishing the bantamweight title, but let's also be frank here. He was going to get stripped of that title. He failed the drug test. If you fail a drug test in the UFC, you're going to get stripped of that title almost no matter what. The commission has already sanctioned him. We're still waiting on what USADA will do. They released a statement that really didn't say a whole lot a few minutes ago. Nothing that we don't already know. Again, we won't know what he tested positive for until they announce it. They release it later on once the process is over with. And also, we don't know what it is, so we don't know how much of a sanction he's facing from USADA. If it is a PED, TJ Dillashaw will be facing a 2-year suspension. So just because the New York Commission suspended him 1 year does not mean that's the only suspension that he will get. USADA could also suspend him. USADA could also find that maybe this was a tainted supplement. We don't know enough about it at this point to know for sure, but we know 1 year from New York, and the USADA situation is still very much up in the air. And yeah, shocking, Shaun. I mean, UFC champion no longer with the title because of a failed drug test. How many times has that happened in UFC history? I mean, it happened to Josh Barnett a long time ago. It happened to John Jones when he was the interim champion. But as far as undisputed champions in the UFC failing a drug test and having their titles taken off, has not happened very often.
Yeah, man. And, this is, my immediate thoughts were this is really just a disastrous turn of events for a man who, at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2019, we were talking about him as he was attempting to stake his claim not only as the best bantamweight of all time, but also just one of the best pound for pound fighters of his era. I mean, he was going for that second title against Henry Cejudo, and there was just so much on the line for him, and everything since that January fight has been disastrous, more or less, for him. And it is strange now. I mean, it is days like today where it is striking to me, as always, how quickly things can change in this sport. Because not long ago, we were talking about a three-way dance between TJ Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz, and Cody Garbrandt for the foreseeable future, for many years to come, at the top of this 135-pound division. You look around today, and none of those guys are in the picture. Not one of them. It is just crazy to me how quickly this happens, man. And it is just another example. Now, I want to add that we need to exercise caution because there's still a lot, like you said, unknown yet about what happened. This is still very much a developing situation. We don't know what he failed for. We don't know if it was PEDs or something less significant. We don't know how this will be handled by USADA. So it is hard to talk about it in that regard. But what we do know alone is very stark. We know that TJ Dillashaw is absolutely 100% out for at least a minimum of a year. That suspension is from the New York State Athletic Commission. He will not fight again in 2019, no matter what, at the very minimum. And that's rough just to start with. Like you said, the next step of this is USADA. It's very possible that USADA could suspend him for longer. 2 years is the standard, as you said. He could end up getting less if it's a tainted supplement, depending on how all this plays out. I wonder that now we move into the speculation mode of this. I wonder if it was a diuretic or perhaps a tainted supplement. Obviously, we know that cut to 125 was a difficult one. It wasn't easy, and it looked incredibly hard while he was doing it. He looked ghoulish while he was making that cut. I mean, he and his nutrition team, led by Sam Calavita, spoke in great detail about all the various ways that they were making that cut to 125 in the lead up to the Cejudo fight. And there's that infamous photo of TJ sitting down with a salad, a few sad Dorito chips, and what looks to be, 500 different supplements sort of just splayed out on his table. So it could be anything right now. I want to ask you, Marc, because we've talked about it a lot on this show, the weird place that the bantamweight division has been in since the Cejudo fight now. In some ways, this brings it some level of clarity. I don't know that this was the clarity that we wanted, but it is obvious now at this point that there will be a vacant title fight. And what is next for this division? Any conversation you have about bantamweight now is going to have to begin and end with Marlon Moraes, period. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. 100% right. It has to be. I mean, no matter what comes next for the bantamweight division, Marlon Moraes has to be prominent in that conversation. Now, I suppose, what they were going to almost certainly do later this year was TJ Dillashaw fighting Henry Cejudo in a rematch, this time for the bantamweight title. That was almost a given. That was what the UFC was eyeing. It was going to happen probably in the first half of this year before we knew about Dillashaw's situation with USADA and the New York Commission. So does that mean Cejudo will stay in that fight and fight someone like Marlon Moraes? Does that mean Marlon Moraes fights a Pedro Munoz or an Aljamain Sterling? That I do not know. And this is also directly tied to the flyweight division, because that was the big storyline going into their fight at UFC Brooklyn back in January, was what was the future of the flyweight division. If Cejudo won, if Dillashaw won, would they fall the division altogether? The UFC is still cutting just about every single fighter in the flyweight division who loses fights. So the division is a shell of its former self. There's still a champion, it's Henry Cejudo, but does he move up to bantamweight permanently now and just relinquish that title? Well, I don't know what they do. I honestly have no idea. Or does he just defend the flyweight title and have bantamweight go on as is. I have no idea what they do now. So there is, in some way, you say there's clarity, but I don't know if I agree. I think that there is actually more questions than ever about what happens, because at least before we knew who the bantamweight champion was and who the best fighter in that division was, and that was TJ Dillashaw. Now there are more questions than answers, a lot more.
My knee-jerk reaction when I sat down and started thinking about it this morning was to do Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes. That felt to me like, just thinking about it, the immediate first step, that felt like maybe the one that made the most sense. That's probably the biggest fight amongst the options. Otherwise, you're looking at Pedro Munoz or Aljamain Sterling as that guy opposite Marlon Moraes. It was interesting. I threw out a poll maybe 10 minutes before the show started just to get curious for fans' perspective. It seems like the Cejudo fight, just off the early results, is more or less where about half the fan base is leaning. Obviously, that is anecdotal, so who cares what that means, right? But man, I honestly don't know that there's a right answer there between those four options. I think I guess, and if you put it to me, I would say maybe do the Cejudo fight and then do Munoz and Sterling on that same card as sort of a glorified #1 contender fight. And then you have that path cleared out, but then you really are abandoning flyweight. I mean, if you just put a gun to your head, what do you do here?
I think you're right. I think Moraes Cejudo is probably the answer. But part of me, because we have to take into account that, look, the flyweight division, there's just not much going on there. There's not much left. The UFC is, again, cutting everyone who loses in the division. I don't even know how many people are left in the flyweight division, but there are not many. So this could be their reasoning to just cut it all together and just go with Cejudo at 135 and just get rid of that division altogether. I mean, I don't want to see that happen, but I mean, we're kind of past the point of no return, because there's not much of a division anymore. So if that's the case, if they really are committed to doing that, then I'm on board for Cejudo Moraes. In a perfect world where there was a living, breathing, functioning flyweight division, which again there is not right now, if we're being honest, I would not object to Marlon Moraes versus Aljamain Sterling, or Marlon Moraes versus Pedro Munoz in that spot. And one more point, Shaun, that I want to bring up. If Cody Garbrandt had won that fight against Pedro Munoz, UFC 235, he would be a shoo-in for this bantamweight title fight. If he won that fight, he would have gotten that shot against Moraes or against Cejudo. Would have been Cody Garbrandt. So he must be. I mean, I know that he tweeted a couple of funny emojis about Dillashaw's positive drug test, but if he won that fight, man, it would be his title fight, absolutely, at bantamweight, due to this Dillashaw failed drug test, 100%.
I'll take it a step further than that. I think if he hadn't even fought that fight, say he was booked in that fight for a month from now, I think he gets pulled and he ends up fighting for that bantamweight title anyway. He was the obvious next guy in line before that loss, no matter whether he won or just sat on the sidelines. You got to feel for him in some regard. But just to compare really quickly, the two guys that we were sort of talking about at 135, you look at Pedro Munoz. He's 7-1 over his last 8. His best win over that run is Cody Garbrandt. Aljamain Sterling is 5-1 over his last 6. His best win is Jimmy Rivera. He's ranked a little higher than Pedro. I don't know that matters at all, because those rankings are garbage. I don't know that you can go wrong with either of those guys. Also, same with Henry Cejudo. So hey, let's keep moving on with the program.
Tournament.
Yeah, one-night tournament. There you go. One last thing I do want to know before we move on, though. Man, Ali Abdelaziz, manager of the Stars. Now, he is the manager of Marlon Moraes and Henry Cejudo as well. He very well could, within the next several months, have 5 UFC champions under his stable, which I don't know that we have ever seen a manager or a management company have that many champions under one roof at the exact same time. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but if you look at Kamaru Usman, you look at Henry Cejudo, Marlon Moraes, and I know there's a couple that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Habib, obviously. I think there might be one more that I'm missing.
Well, Kelvin Gastelum beats Israel for the interim title.
Kelvin, there you go. That 5 potential champions under the UFC banner, that is incredible. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if I can remember a management company ever having something like that.
Certainly not in the modern era. Certainly not in the modern era where there are many belts like this. No, it is a crazy accomplishment. It would be. I mean, it's already a great accomplishment, and it's going toward historic status.
Yeah, very much so. Well, hey, let's keep moving on. I'm sure this is not the last time we'll talk about this on the show. And actually, hey, here you go. The next question coming up from the GOAT 124, who addresses this to me personally. Shaun Al-Shatti.
The GOAT, by the way.
What's that?
You can't call yourself the GOAT.
He's like the GOAT, but number 124. So he's like far down on the list.
You can call yourself a GOAT, but you can't call yourself the GOAT.
I see you getting prematurely upset at this question. Shaun Al-Shatti. Shaun, I
do read the questions beforehand, Shaun.
Shaun, what is your sincere opinion on Marc's Raimondi stance? That's an interesting use
That's Burundi to you, GOAT.
What is your sincere opinion on Marc's Raimondi stance on fighters using PEDs? He says they should not have an asterisk next to their name. What do you think? Should Marc have an asterisk next to his name because he's also using PEDs? Shaun Al-Shatti rules. Asterisk, 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 Marc Raimondi, a bunch of asterisks. That's probably the best question we have ever gotten on this
question ever.
Fine program. Marc Raimondi, as I've said in the past, absolutely deserves an asterisk next to his name because he is definitely using PEDs. Look at that man. He is so swole over there.
What kind of PEDs would I be using?
He's bursting out of that shirt. No, I don't. I mean, we have a difference of opinion. It's fun. Although I will ask you really quickly, Marc, use this as a segue to maybe ask the last question about TJ Dillashaw on the show. Obviously, it is very early. Obviously, we don't know really what popped. There are a lot of things about this that we don't understand. But just off the bat, does this change the way you look at TJ Dillashaw and his accomplishments over the course of his career?
No. I need more information. I need to see what it was. How many times, Shaun, and this is not even a knock toward USADA, but how many times have we heard USADA potential anti-doping violation, guy fails a drug test, or female fighter fails a drug test, and then we see what it was for, and you're like, oh, it's just that. It's not even a PED, or it's not even a steroid. It's something else. Something not innocuous. It's still obviously something that's prohibited and banned, but it's not something that's really going to make you go like, oh wow, that guy was using an anabolic steroid. So I want to find out more first. I want to see what it was. Look, I mean, even if it was a diuretic, I mean, he was trying to cut to 125. So I don't know if that makes me think anything differently about TJ Dillashaw's past accomplishments. I still think that he's a phenomenal fighter. I still think that he's one of the best bantamweights of all time. I need more information. I'm not going to put an asterisk next to his name before I even know what the guy popped for. Of course not.
Yeah, and one note coming over from Twitter from a listener right now, Mad Tofu Disease notes that,
wow.
Imagine if TJ was the double champ giving up 2 belts.
Mm-hmm.
This could have been so much worse for the UFC. Another reason to not give anyone 2 belts.
Giving up 2 belts, and that first ESPN main event would be a no contest. That would be ugly, real ugly.
He has a very good point. This could have been a lot worse for the UFC. It's already bad, but it could have been a lot worse. Hey, let's move on. There's a lot to talk about. Next question is concerning the same thing. It's from Used to Be Good on MMA Fighting, saying TJ and Cody EPO accusations. Hello, guys. I hope you have a great day. With the recent developments in TJ's adverse findings, do you think the UFC and USADA should have paid attention to Cody's accusations? Last year, he accused TJ for taking EPO and claimed that TJ was the person who was teaching everybody at Team Alpha Male the art of doping. I know that you hate answering PED-related questions, but this is the nature of the sport. Hashtag PEGO champions. I like that hashtag. I'll just address that real quick, and then we can move on. I mean, it's not as if USADA didn't. I mean, the idea that USADA should have paid attention to Cody's accusations. It's not like USADA wasn't testing TJ this entire time.
Right.
USADA is a program that is testing him religiously, constantly, over and over again. It's not as if they just didn't listen to Cody Garbrandt and said, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't test this bantamweight champion in the UFC. They've been testing him the whole time. So if they catch him now, they catch him now. But I don't know that question. I don't know that. I guess that has anything to do with anything.
Also, I would say that, and in this particular instance, I don't know if they did listen to Garbrandt and follow through, but they do pay attention to that kind of stuff. This is not random testing. This is actually something that I forget who I was having a conversation with about this. It might have been Askren and Woodley before their fights at UFC 235.
It was Woodley. I remember that actually.
Yeah. So It's not random. It's not, and they don't say it's random. USADA does not say it's random. It is a system that is I guess they would call it like an educated system where they do take tips, they do follow leads. It's not just they pull a name out of a hat and they test you. There's a reason why people get tested more than others. Sometimes we don't know what the reason is. Sometimes it's an innocuous reason, but there is a reason. And I don't know what the case is here with Dillashaw, but he's been tested 39 times, Shaun. 39 times since the program started. And all of them have been clean except for this one in competition on January 19th, the day of the fight. He was tested twice this year, and I'm looking last year, 13 times in 2018 and 14 times in 2017. Dude's been tested a ton, and nothing has come back. So I don't know about that question with Garbrandt, and I don't know if that was pre-fight trash talk, what that whole situation was, but USADA was certainly testing TJ Dillashaw. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So hey, let's move on to this past weekend, because there was a lot that happened this past weekend. So this
that's the word I was trying to grasp for. That's from Dave Dimspace from Twitter. The word that I was looking for was it's a strategic drug testing program. It's not random.
All right, there you go. So there's a lot happened this past weekend, and H. Dela Cruz 24 wants to start by talking about Ben Askren. So UFC London. So was UFC London the worst case for Askren? He writes, he had hopes of fighting Darren Till for the #1 contender spot. Till ends up losing. He was hoping to fight Masvidal. He gets into it with Leon Edwards. Does this now make Askren Lawler 2, in parentheses, I hope not, easier for the UFC to force on Ben? So Mark, this is an interesting question to start off our London conversation. We had talked about last week about how Ben Askren was sort of dominating the conversation here at UFC London beforehand. Even he went there. He had a fan Q&A. He was very clearly trying to set up a fight with Darren Till. Darren Till ends up having a little double finger exchange with him during the fan Q&A. It seems very fun. It seems like that is the fight that's going to happen as long as Darren Till ends up winning. And we all know what happened. Darren Till ends up losing. And then Jorge Masvidal gets in a little brouhaha with Leon Edwards after the show. Kind of leaves Ben Askren out with nothing left to do. Was this worst case scenario for Ben Askren?
No, I don't think so at all.
No. Okay.
No, I don't. And I think Askren Till would have been really interesting. And I think the lead up to that fight would have been really entertaining. But look, the welterweight division to me is now the most interesting division in the UFC by leaps and bounds. It is red hot. I mean, it has contenders and names and intriguing performers and guys getting into fights backstage during interviews across the board. I love welterweight. 170 is so awesome right now. He's got a new champion in Kamaru Usman, who by the way, phenomenal interview with Joe Rogan this week. I mean, Usman really carries himself incredibly well, which was what I was saying during fight week, which no one was listening to me during fight week, and I got crapped on for saying that he carried himself well. Anyway,
well, in fairness, no one really listens to you in general.
Well, I mean, that they're probably right about that, but no. So to answer the question long-windedly, like I usually do, no, I think Ben Askren. I think the options are almost endless at this point. I mean, so we figure Usman is going to fight Colby Covington next, right? Is that?
Yes.
I mean, I don't even know if that's fair to say because we don't know. Who knows?
But that seems like a given at this point.
It seems like that is probably going to happen. So then now all of a sudden you have George Masvidal coming up. And I think that George Masvidal, which is crazy to say because this guy has been around forever. I mean, this guy has almost 50 career fights, and he's just coming out into his own now as a star in the welterweight division. And people in the know have kind of known about Masvidal and who he is and his personality and his charisma for a long time. But now he's kind of opened himself up to some of the newer fans, to the casual fans. 3-piece and a soda. I mean, the guy is fantastic, and he can really fight. And he knocked the hell out of Darren Till on Saturday night in London, in Till's home country. So you could do that fight with Askren. You could do Askren versus Masvidal. You can do Askren versus the winner maybe of this weekend's fight between Thompson and Pettis if Wonder Boy wins, because I don't think Askren would fight Pettis, his training partner. There are a whole host of things you can do with Askren. I don't want to see Askren Lawler too, but you could do that too. I mean, that would also be a good fight. And look, if something goes wrong again with Colby Covington, Askren is probably the number one contender for Usman's title. Who knew?
I'm going to answer the question directly. That was absolutely a worst case scenario for Ben Askren.
Why?
It's not like it's the worst thing ever that happened to him, but in that specific scenario where he is setting up this particular fight, and it seems as though it would have been a big fight, and then he can't even maybe get the secondary fight that he was setting up. That's absolutely a worst case scenario for him. It's not like he's out here with nothing to do. Of course he has options. He still has options. But that was not what he went to London to do. He went to London to set up that fight against the winner. And now I don't know that he's going to get that fight. We're going to talk about it later in the show. But Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards kind of seems like the fight to make right now. That seems like the fight most people want to see. That leaves Ben Askren with options like a Santiago Ponzinibbio or maybe a Wonderboy Thompson or something like that. But also makes it very easy for the UFC to say, hey, man, we were willing to entertain you on these two, but the Robbie Lawler rematch might be the fight for you now. Like, that was definitely a worst case scenario for a guy who was trying to set up a big fight against Darren Till or Jorge Masvidal, and now is going to get probably neither.
I would say, and I totally hear you out, and I get what you're saying, but there was never a guarantee that Askren was going to get that Till fight anyway. It was really up to the UFC
but he was going to. He was going to.
I don't know. I don't know if that's for certain. And
I mean, nobody knows if it was for certain, but the way it was setting up and there was the fan momentum behind it, it was very apparent that was the fight that people wanted to see if Darren Till won.
Possibly. But I would watch Askren versus Masvidal. And I think that would be incredibly entertaining. And I think those are the two hottest guys in the division right now.
I'm just gonna let that last one linger.
What?
No, nothing. Two hottest guys in the division.
Two hottest guys. Yeah, they're hot right now. I'm not saying they're attractive.
Hey man, I didn't say that. You're just saying it. Let's keep things moving. We'll get back to UFC.
Carlos Condit's still in the welterweight division. That's the hottest guy in the division, if we're being honest.
I can't argue with that. That's fair. Next question.
You got it. You got this one.
Yeah, I got you.
Right.
Next one's coming from Dizzy Dorp. UFC pay-per-view on ESPN Plus. And so this one kind of snuck up on us, Mark, but this is a big deal. So
yeah.
Writes, what are your thoughts on the UFC moving all pay-per-view cards to ESPN Plus? At first, I was excited, thinking, wow, all pay-per-view will be included. Ha, ha, ha. Silly you, Dizzy Dorf. If you have a subscription, but nope. Will we ever see the model WWE Network uses? No, you're never going to see that. The UFC likes money too much. But, Mark,
yes,
UFC pay-per-views now for the next 7 years, exclusively sold in the United States on ESPN Plus. A paywall to a paywall has now been set up for fight fans to pay for fights, basically, to pay their hard-earned money for fights. What's your takeaway from this whole situation?
It's great for the UFC. I mean, it is a fantastic deal for the UFC. It's perfect because, and on a number of levels. So on the forefront, on the most obvious level, ESPN is paying the UFC to sell pay-per-views on ESPN Plus. So before there is even a pay-per-view to buy, the UFC is making money off the bat, right off the bat. How much? I don't know. But ESPN is paying the UFC to show the pay-per-views on ESPN Plus. And that adds more money and another 2 years to the UFC's deal with ESPN, which now runs through 2025. So that off the bat is a great deal for the UFC because now it doesn't matter to them as much who's even on those cards, right? Because they're already getting that money. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed money. It does not matter how many people buy the pay-per-views on ESPN Plus anymore to the UFC because they're getting that money up front. Now, it may matter a little bit because the question, and we don't know the answer in full, is how much of the revenue on the back end now does the UFC get? How much money from pay-per-view revenue does the UFC get? What is that percentage split? When the UFC was on, like, say, DirecTV, it was 50-50. So your pay-per-view buys, your pay-per-view dollars was going 50% to DirecTV, 50% to the UFC. With ESPN Plus, I don't know. I don't know what that's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be half and half, if ESPN gets a lot more because they've already paid the UFC on the front end for it. So either way, it's great for the UFC. They're going to make a lot more money off this. They cement their relationship with ESPN. For ESPN, it's great because now you have to subscribe to ESPN Plus to even buy a pay-per-view. So if you want to watch Conor McGregor's next fight, guess what? You got to sign up to $4.99 a month to watch ESPN, to subscribe to ESPN Plus, just to have the right to watch the McGregor fight. Now, how does this affect fans? That's a little bit tougher. It is a reduced price. It's going from $65 essentially to $60, but that extra $5 you'll have to pay now per month for ESPN Plus. So it's a little bit of an inconvenience in some ways for fans. Which, by the way, I think 75%, Dave Meltzer reported, of fans currently watch on their satellite or their cable provider. So that's the bulk of people watching at home from cable, from satellite, from DirecTV, what have you, ordering on their TV. They can't do that anymore. So how many people are they going to lose in that transition? I don't know. Shaun, you watch at home, right, on your satellite or your cable?
I did. I actually just cut the cord this past month with DirecTV, so this actually timing works out in some way for me, because I wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. But yeah, for years that was how I did it through DirecTV. Yeah,
same. I have DirecTV and I watch it that way. I can't cut the cord though, because I have to watch ESPN, right? When ESPN is showing UFC fights, I have to watch that. Do I not? So it's hard.
That's on ESPN Plus.
Even the ESPN fights are on ESPN Plus too.
Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that. That's a good little bit of info. And another thing about this deal too that I don't know, and I tried to find out the answer, and no one was really willing to disclose it, is how does this affect UFC fighters' pay-per-view points?
That's the big point I want to talk about. Yeah. Go for it. Go ahead.
So I guess and this goes back to the back end. So pay-per-view revenue. How much percentage does ESPN get of those buys? How much percentage does the UFC get? And when you're a UFC champion or you're a UFC big star, the biggest chunk of your money is not your regular purse. It's the pay-per-view percentage that you get. So when Conor McGregor fights, he's making a guaranteed purse of what, $2 million, $3 million? That's not how much Conor McGregor makes in a fight. Conor McGregor makes a lot more because of the share of the pay-per-view revenue that he got and he gets. How does that affect this with ESPN Plus, where we don't know how much percentage on the back end the UFC is getting, and we don't know how much percentage now UFC fighters are going to get? Even if the UFC, let's say fighters got the same amount or at least the same percentage as they did before with the old model, the regular cable TV model, pay-per-view buys are going to go down
significantly.
Almost 100. It's obvious that they're going to go down, because again, 75% of people watching every pay-per-view are watching at home on their cable box, on their DirecTV. You're not going to get all those people to subscribe to ESPN Plus. So the numbers are going to go down, which means that which means fighters who are making that pay-per-view points, that's almost definitely going to go down too. It cannot affect them in a positive way unless they work something out with the UFC on the front end. They get more guaranteed money. So there are a lot of questions there, and I think a lot of managers and high-profile fighters are going to be asking those questions here shortly.
Yeah, you addressed a lot there, so I'll try to, I guess, parse through.
I did talk a lot, didn't I? I just spoke for a very long time.
That was a good 5 minutes.
I don't know if it was a good 5 minutes, but it was 5 minutes.
So first thing I want to say, obviously, you got me a little flustered because you hit so many points. But like you said, the big deal. This is a win for the UFC, because ultimately, when they were with DirecTV and just throughout the various satellite providers, the split was 50-50. It was 50% of the revenue would go to the providers, 50% would go to the UFC. They have wanted to negotiate a bigger percentage of that for a long time. That's actually what caused that issue with DirecTV for UFC 230. I think it was 235. Maybe it was 234. It was one of the recent pay-per-views where it looks for a second like DirecTV wasn't going to be carrying it, and then they kind of made up at the last second. So I'm assuming, and it seems as though that for the ESPN deal right now, they have negotiated a much bigger percentage. So that is already a big win for the UFC. It is similar to what we had talked about, not identical, but somewhat similar to what we had talked about in the past with Bellator and DAZN, where a lot of their biggest fights are now going on DAZN because they basically negotiated a gigantic base number that they're going to get paid per show. And so they don't have to worry about the ratings, etc., because they're just getting X per show which is already a good guarantee compared to what they had before. So now with UFC, say that they have a pay-per-view that would have done 200,000 buys. It's probably going to do less than that now, but they're already making enough money from it that it feels as though it was a good, successful pay-per-view. So they don't have to worry as much on that in that regard. I want to hit a couple points with the fans though, because it seems as though it does screw over fans in a couple different ways, just in terms of like people who live in places with very unreliable internet are now purely going to have to get this content through streaming through the internet. And that can be very challenging. I know I've heard a lot of problems with ESPN Plus from people in those kind of areas where maybe the stream isn't the best. And they're now going to have to, that's basically where you can consume all of your UFC content now. I certainly wouldn't be happy about that if I was a fan in that regard.
You have to go to a bar, right, or a restaurant. If you can't really watch ESPN Plus, that's going to be like your only option if you're in a rural area.
Yeah, I mean, for the UFC at least, though, it does embed the ESPN even further with the UFC, where they now ESPN must feel so committed to this pot now, to where if they're running all of these pay-per-views, they are going to go all out with the promotion of each one of these cards, each one of these fights, and just try to maximize as many people coming to their service as possible, which is only a good thing for the UFC. But the point I want to mention, a point that hit me the most, and you touched on it a little bit, this would never, ever happen if the fighters had a union. This would never, ever be allowed to happen if the fighters had a union without some level of negotiation beforehand, because like you said, this will affect the pay-per-view points and thus the revenue and earnings that fighters can make in such a significant way that it is frankly incredible. Because as you mentioned, the majority for the top 5% of fighters in the sport, the champions, the long reigning champions, the big stars, even like people who Conor McGregor, no belt, definitely still has this. Pay-per-view points are the bulk of their money. That is where they make their bank. That is where they make the most career earnings for their entire careers, through those pay-per-view points. And now the UFC has effectively set up another barrier to entry to order these pay-per-views. And every time you set up one more barrier to entry, you lose a percentage of the fans who are just not going to take that step, who are not going to clear that hurdle. And this is a significant hurdle to clear, man. You have trained people for decades at this point that you order the pay-per-view through your TV, and you order it through your DirecTV or Comcast or whoever you have. This is a big change, and not all fans read MMA fighting or on active on Twitter or this and that. I think you're going to lose a significant chunk of that casual fan base just right off the bat. And say a pay-per-view before would have done 300,000. How big of a hit is that going to do now? Is that going to hit 100,000, 150? Like, how far does this carry over? And if you're that champion who is making your money off of those 300,000 buys, how much money are you losing through this? Like, the savvy fighters and the savvy managers and the people who actually have enough power, like a Conor McGregor or a John Jones or something, I am sure they will negotiate either a bigger base purse or a different pay-per-view point split to where it will sort of equal out their loss of revenue. But there might be guys, it's hard for us to say because we're not in these meetings, but there might be guys, the smaller champions, the champions who don't have as much leverage, who are kind of stuck with this situation and now are going to lose a significant chunk of their earnings. This would have never, ever been allowed in any, if say the NBA or the NFL or MLB, any major sport had a similar setup to this, with pay-per-view being a majority of someone's contract earnings. This would have never, ever been allowed to go through without some level of deep negotiation, just because of the union or association or something, because you cannot make those sort of unilateral decisions that greatly affect people's lives like this. It's a giant win for the UFC, but for everybody else, I don't know.
Yeah, no, very, very well said. I think you hit all the key points. It remains to be seen. It remains to be seen how this affects fighters, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Reebok deal, where the fighters were used to, at least some fighters were used to, having X amount of revenue from sponsorship, and that almost went away overnight when the UFC went to Reebok, and we forget because it was 4 years ago now, which is crazy that it was that long ago. But seems like it's happening all over again. And now the higher profile fighters are going to be the ones who get hit the most.
I will. One last thing I want to add before we move on. Also, too, this seems to really just nuke UFC Fight Pass. This streaming service that the UFC has spent all of these years building up, this seems to render it relatively useless unless you're just a really hardcore fan who is watching all the various smaller promotions on the Fight Pass.
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen what they end up doing with Fight Pass. If they're going to add, they keep saying they're going to add a lot more original content to it. There is a whole bunch of fight promotions from all different kinds of fighting styles, including Lethway, which is pretty entertaining. Combat Jiu-Jitsu now is on there, so it looks like they're still trying to add. It's almost like UFC Fight Pass is. And then there are still prelim fights on Fight Pass, but it's almost like UFC Fight Pass is like a streaming service that the UFC owns, but it's not really a UFC. There's all the archive fights there and everything, but you can get those on ESPN Plus too. But now it's almost like UFC Fight Pass is like the zone where they have more outside promotions and they have more outside stuff. They have Roy Jones boxing. Then they do their own content, and that's how almost what they have to push now because they pretty much sold all their own content. Which, hey, good for them. They're able to do that to ESPN Plus. Yeah,
and if you guys have any other questions about this, I would highly recommend you go check out Dave Meltzer's article on MMA fighting. He just went up today. He is the expert when it comes to television rights, pay-per-view points, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of good stuff in that article. A lot of questions that you might be answered in there. So go check that out. In the meantime, let's keep it moving. The next question coming from the MMA Fighting page. Sorry, Crying Towel, I'm going to skip you because it's more TJ stuff. We already kind of went through that. So we're jumping to Ted Bear, who wants to talk about 3-piece in a soda. Jorge Masvidal's description of attacking Leon Edwards, he writes, will go down as a classic one-liner. What are the best one-liners you've heard from fighters publicly and behind the scenes? Let's use this as a broader question to talk about Jorge Masvidal, but I'll address you right off the top. I mean, I think Nate Diaz probably has a lot of good one-liners. I think Conor McGregor probably has a lot of good ones. My Balls Was Hot by Derek Lewis is another classic one. Just even within the past like 3 or 4 years, it feels like so many different one-liners have been added to the MMA lexicon.
Yes. Who the Fook is that guy? Is still probably the all-time. I think that's the all-time one.
I'd say I'm not surprised MFers is my all-time one, but they're all good.
That's a good one. That's a good one. No, they're all good. There's a host of these. Hey, look, My Balls Was Hot got Derek Lewis about $1 million. So that might be that one phrase, and of course that knockout made Derek Lewis about 7 figures. So that might be the best all time in terms of rate on investment, but return on investment. But there are a number of good ones. I have to say about Masvidal though, Shaun, and I find myself. I mean, I'm wildly entertained by Jorge Masvidal, wildly, and I have been for a long time. I've been on the Masvidal train for a while.
Excuse me, you picked against him last week.
I did.
Throw that out there. I did not.
You're not wrong about that, but I mean, I've been interviewing Masvidal for years. I've always found the guy, really fascinating, and again, entertaining. But like, a part of me is like, I find it entertaining, but then also he punched a guy like in the face 3 times outside the octagon. So I'm kind of having like I'm really entertained, and I think the guy is really charismatic and fun, and I'm like drawn to him. But also like he might have committed a crime.
So hold that thought, because that's actually what I want to talk about, right?
All right.
So Jorge Masvidal comes out and he has maybe the best performance of his entire career, a career that you have mentioned. It spans a lot of different eras, Strike Force, all sorts of, backyard street fights. Like, he has been in this game for a long, long time. And that might have been the best damn performance of his entire career. He knocks out Darren Till and then does what he does with Leon Edwards, 3-piece with the soda. In a weird way, this feels like the night that Jorge Masvidal became a star.
Yes.
Right? And I wonder, what does that say about us? Because if you go back even 5 years, 10 years, I feel like the reaction to what he and Leon Edwards did is vastly different, whether from the media, whether from the UFC, whether from Dana White, who is not going to punish Jorge Masvidal for any of this. You used to be able to get fired for this sort of thing back in the day. And now it's very much celebrated. And I wonder, I mean, I'm not any better. I did a post-fight show on Saturday night with Jorge Masvidal, and I thought this whole situation was hilarious. I'm not going to sit up here and moralize and act like I was offended by what Jorge Masvidal did, because I just wonder if we've all been desensitized through the last several years of all of the crazy shit that we have seen in this sport, where to now we just watched this guy live on ESPN Plus throw four sucker punches effectively at Leon Edwards, cut him. And we all kind of just thought it was hilarious. Like, what does that say about us?
I mean, I wouldn't call them sucker punches, but your point is noted. I do feel like that should not have been my reaction. My reaction should not have been like, wow, okay. I want to watch more of Jorge Masvidal. I don't know, man. I was having a hard time with this. It's a weird thing. And you know, some people will say like, well, look, these guys are fighters. It's after a fight. Testosterone is high, adrenaline is running high. You know, things can kind of, these things happen in MMA as a wise man.
You go back to the Nashville brawl. Like, that was a giant deal. Yeah. When that happened. Like, there were obviously people at the time who were like, oh, this is great. That's who the Diaz brothers are. But a large majority of the media and the fan base were also like, man, we can't do that on public television. Like, that's just not a good look. Yeah. And at this point, it seems as though we've just fully embraced it.
It is crazy, because it's not as bad as throwing a dolly through a bus window, right? Maybe we're just like, okay.
Is that it? Is that the bar has just been risen so high with the dolly stuff and the Khabib stuff and everything, that it's just, if it falls below that, it's just like, hey, you know, Jorge Masvidal, he has a nice catchphrase. This is fun.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that says about us, because this is not, I mean, it's entertainment. I mean, MMA is entertainment in the same way that WWE and pro wrestling is entertainment, but this is real. Leon Edwards got hit in the face, and he was cut, and he needed medical treatment afterward. It legitimately happened. Masvidal hit him with 4 punches. So I don't know how to reconcile my thoughts about just how damn excited I am to watch Jorge Masvidal do anything, with the fact that, I mean, in other worlds, if that happened in the NBA, Masvidal suspended for like a year. You know, for a very long time, right?
Absolutely.
For many games, maybe not a year, but many games. And in the UFC, it's like, and I guess I get it, because, I mean, ultimately we're watching a cage fight, right? That's what they do. That's their job. They're not trying to put a ball in a hoop. They are fighting in a cage, and sometimes they fight outside the cage. I guess that's okay. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this, and maybe I'm not a good person to be, because this is what I do, and this is all we do. But yeah, here we are. 3 pieces.
Yeah, I just anecdotally, just to kind of end the conversation, I had a couple friends that had texted me about that on Saturday when they saw it, because it happened live on ESPN Plus. Like, that interview was live, and people texted me like, "Oh man, Jorge Masvidal is probably, you're like, this dude's gonna be suspended for like a year, right?" And it's just like, no punishment. We're all glorifying it. I'm not gonna lie. Masvidal versus Leon Edwards is very much the fight I want to see now. Like, Leon Edwards, in a weird way, got what he wanted by this, because he was trying to get that fight, and it seems as though he got that fight. I don't know. Last thing on this, is Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards the fight you want?
It is, but I also, I mean, I do want to see that fight, but it really depends on how the top of the division shakes out. If it is Colby Covington getting the shot, I kind of want to see Askren versus Masvidal. I feel like Leon Edwards is very, very good. He's very good. I mean, he is incredibly underrated, but afterward didn't do a whole lot to get himself over to the fans who maybe didn't know who he was before. And he even got booed in England. Got booed in his home country, which I think that's really messed up, that they were cheering for Gunnar Nelson from Iceland over Leon Edwards, who was from their country. That's kind of screwed up, and I don't know why. I don't know why that was, although I have some suspicions. But yeah, I don't know if Edwards. I don't know. I think he wasted his opportunity. Masvidal got right out there and had an interview with Brett Okamoto on ESPN, and that's where he coined that catchphrase, and he got out in front of it, and he made himself into a bigger star that way. Whereas Edwards didn't really talk and didn't really take advantage of that moment in the spotlight. Which again, it sucks that we have to talk about it in that way, but this is entertainment, and that's how things get done, unfortunately.
I would push back on that a little bit. I mean, our own Pizza Carroll had him on the Eurobash podcast this week, and he definitely had some things to say about Jorge Masvidal. So maybe he didn't do it the night of, but he definitely did try to take ownership of it.
And he released a statement on Sunday, but I feel like that opportunity was there on Saturday night to say something or do something, and I think they kind of missed the boat a little bit on it. Okay. And also, Masvidal's coming off a big knockout win, and Edwards was a little bit more of a technical, tactical win over Gunnar Nelson, which, hey, great win, but wasn't that kind of spectacular win that Masvidal had.
Well, hey, we have a lot of green questions left. Oh my goodness.
We've been talking for an hour? Oh, God.
I'm just looking through this, and we still have a ton left. So let's try to get through some of these. The next one's coming from After the Fights on MMA Fighting, who wants to know about piracy in MMA. Pirating pay-per-views is a common practice in the MMA fandom community. Do you think that limiting the legal availability of the product will lead to an increase in piracy? Unless the UFC is collecting a windfall on the front end of this deal, it is hard for me to envision how this decision would be financially beneficial to them. But again, as Dana says, nobody knows shit about this business. Thoughts? So this definitely is financially beneficial to them. I mean, we kind of covered a lot of that already.
Yes.
I do think that this will definitely increase the piracy when it comes to the pay-per-views in some capacity. I think that was, I don't know about you, but that was a large majority of the response that I saw to this from the fans, whether on social media or our own website or something where, well, I guess now I'm going to pirate more of these pay-per-views. I definitely think this will have some effect on it. But I mean, Marc, you still there? Marc, you still there? I have lost Marc Raimondi. I'm live on this show and I have lost Marc Raimondi. He is completely gone. Okay, that's fun. I will we're gonna just try to figure this out. Hey, Evie.
Hello.
Hey, you're back.
I am back. I have no idea what happened. That's the first time. Are we still live?
Oh, we're still live. I was about to bring the dog in and start doing tricks with the dog. I was going to start wasting time.
Evie may have some better insights than I do on some things.
My point is effectively that I believe this will definitely increase the pirating to some degree when it comes to pay-per-views. What about you?
I honestly, I don't really mess with that stuff. If I'm being honest, I really don't like looking at illegal streams. It kind of gives me because I feel like maybe I'm a giant square, which I am a giant square.
Well, yes, you definitely are.
I feel like if I am interested in watching something, I will give my hard-earned money to that product because I want to also support that product in some ways, including the fighters. If I'm gonna watch a fight, I want at least the fighters to get some of that money, even though I know they get a very small percentage of it. But yeah, I guess so. If you are making it more difficult and you're adding another paywall on top of the existing paywall, I would imagine that it would lead to more piracy. Yes.
All right. You want to hit the next question?
Yeah. Hopefully I stay with you guys for a little bit. Another one from After the Fights, Paulo Costa and journalism. All right. This question is primarily about how do journalists decide whether or not to report on something. Paulo Costa's manager has denied Romero's allegations regarding a failed drug test. In Romero's interview with Mr. Helwani, it appeared that Ariel had previously heard unconfirmed reports that Costa had failed the drug test. Mr. Helwani never reported the drug failure as news, but from my perspective, he did walk Romero into disclosing this information. Do either of you have a problem with the way this particular interview was conducted? Have either of you ever had to balance wanting to report something that you knew was true but couldn't confirm?
I actually didn't see the interview in question. I read excerpts from it, but I didn't actually watch the interview. So it's hard for me to comment on how it was conducted. I mean, I trust Ariel. I know he is one of the best in the game of this, so I don't think he would do anything malicious. But again, I haven't seen it, so it's hard for me to comment there. And in regard to the second question of balancing, reporting something that you knew was true but couldn't confirm, I think that's more or less part of the job at this point, right? Like me and you, both of us, we speak to people all day. We're on the phone all day. We're talking to managers, fighters, etc. We probably know things that we would like to put out there, but it is irresponsible to do that unless you have the correct, I guess, sources or confirmations or just things from all sides. You can't just willy-nilly put something out there if one person told you it. And that may end up being challenging, and that may end up being frustrating at times when maybe somebody beats you to a story that you had already. But that's kind of the game. And I think we here at MMA Fighting in particular take a great responsibility and care in trying to make sure that everything we report has been confirmed through numerous sources and is 100% true. We are not trying to put anything out there half-ass.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I didn't watch the whole Costa interview with Ariel, but I think the Costa situation is very fair game, because if you remember a few months ago, there was that weird thing that came out that looked like he may have been taking an IV, and he was kind of already accused publicly. So I think asking Romero about that is completely fair game. And it did glean some information, and we talked about it too, where Romero was told by someone apparently inside the UFC, or at least Romero's management was told by someone in the UFC that Costa's dealing with the USADA situation. So I have no problem with Ariel's news gathering in any way in that situation. And Costa's team is denying it, but fact of the matter is that we still don't know why he's out of that fight with Romero. It was a fight they were trying to do for a while, and it's not happening now. And we don't have any fights booked for Paulo Costa right now. So that situation to me is still developing. And yes, to answer the final question, so many times have I had the information and I've known it to be true, and I couldn't report it until I had all of the facts and all of the correct sourcing. One example of that is John Jones when he tested positive after UFC 214. I knew about that. I had it. I actually had it written. I had it. I was just making sure that I had all of my T's crossed and my I's dotted, and I knew it was true because my sources were very good and I trust them. But I didn't have as much as I wanted. I wanted more because I don't look, even if I'm 99% sure, I really want to be 100% sure. So I waited to get one more source of information before I published the story. And in that time, TMZ broke the story that John Jones had tested positive for a steroid. This was back in 2017, right? Yeah, after UFC 214. So yeah, that's one example. It's happened a number of times, but yeah, that is the process, and that is our responsibility. Because look, if we start reporting things off one source or secondhand information, and it's completely not true, that ruins our credibility as journalists. It ruins our credibility as a website, and it's just not good. You know, we want to earn the trust of our viewers and readers. It's paramount to me. It's number one, to me.
Absolutely. It is better to be late and correct than the first one out there and end up missing a beat on it.
I'd rather be last than wrong in any way.
Yeah, I agree with you. And let's keep it moving. Next question is coming from Hefe01, who wants to talk about Kamaru Usman on the Joe Rogan Experience. He writes, Usman honestly won me over going on the JRE podcast. He speaks well, seems to be quite intelligent. Obviously, being an immigrant, he's quite worldly. This is a whole side that the UFC has never put out to my knowledge. The immigrant angle has been presented, but I feel the UFC is dropping the ball again. He has outstanding Olympic wrestling, but no mention of him living at the Olympic Training Center. I didn't know he has been in the US for 20 years or so. Listening to the UFC immigration story, they make it seem like he's fresh off the boat. Has the UFC dropped the ball on promoting, building, and telling the personal story of another champ? And I think there is a safe to say answer there. I mean, yes, to be honest. And I think the UFC has dropped the ball on just generally telling stories about a lot of their fighters and a lot of their champions. A lot of these guys and women are incredibly interesting people with very difficult backgrounds, very unique backgrounds. fascinating backgrounds in many regards, because who the hell would come into this sport unless you were just some kind of crazy person to some degree, right? Like you have to be a very interesting person inherently to want to do this for the promise of maybe potentially some money, but probably very little money. So a simple answer to that would be yes. I agree. I think the UFC has dropped the ball with Usman a little bit.
Yeah, I think that is true, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He just became the champion. This is not someone who's been the champion for a long time. They haven't told his full story yet. I imagine that will come with time and hopefully come soon. And the relationship with ESPN, I think, is a big deal because it seems like ESPN is very committed to telling these fighters stories, and I think that Usman will get that treatment next. And I mean, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast. That wasn't an accident. I'm sure that was at least facilitated in part by the UFC in some way. So that was good, and I'm glad he's getting a chance to tell a story because he's a very interesting guy and a very deep guy. This is not just the guy who said that he gave 30% after one fight, which I feel like a lot of fans like just comment that when they see Usman's name. No, he's a very layered, complex, interesting, eloquent, intelligent individual. And I think he'll be a great ambassador for the UFC and for the welterweight division as long as he's the champion.
Yeah. What's next?
All right. From Stonerhead.
Our good friend Stonerhead.
Jorge Matricidal. So not only did Jorge Masvidal give Leon Edwards the 3-piece with the soda, he also apparently wants to kill his own mother. Stonerhead. Jorge Matricidal. That's how it's spelled here. Could you lay off the freaking blunt for one Wednesday, Stonerhead? Christ.
There's no autocorrect in the world is going to correct Masvidal to Matricidal. What the hell?
Unless Stonerhead is writing matricide, texting someone about matricide on the regular. What are you doing, man? Should we call somebody? Should we find out who this is and do a welfare check? Jesus. All right. Anyway. Hey guys, happy Wednesday to you both. Very happy Wednesday for you, apparently. I love to watch MMA, but I don't like to watch violence outside of the cage, which is ironic considering you just talked about matricide. Anyway, I think what Masvidal done was disgusting. Dude was coming off the back of an awesome performance against Till. His inside cage interview, Jorge came across as a nice, likable dude, but to then go do what he did, I found disgusting. The fan reaction to this, I also find disgusting. Even our own Shaun Al-Shatti, calling you out, Shaun, was laughing about it in the post-show chat, which I found a big letdown. A couple inches higher, and Edwards could have lost an eye. Well, I'll let you address this. We kind of talked about this already, but is there anything you wanted to add to our feelings of joy after Masvidal did all the things that he did on Saturday?
No, not really. I mean, we kind of discussed this, and I think it's a topic that I'm actually like kind of really interested in this topic in general. Just like why? Because I agree. I mean, I think 4 years ago, my reaction to this is probably different than it was on Saturday night.
Changed us, Shaun.
This sport has changed us, and I don't know if it's in a good way, but it definitely feels
it's in a good way.
It's definitely made a lot of this sort of thing. The chaos of the last several years has definitely made a lot of this feel very flippant in a way that it probably shouldn't. And I probably shouldn't have been enjoying myself over it, but I also don't apologize for it because I'm not ever one to sit here and moralize about what people should and shouldn't do. I mean, I think this is fighting. And I think we've gotten to a point where we've accepted maybe that this is part of this game in a weird way. And I don't know if this is good or bad, and we're just repeating ourselves at this point, but I mean, it is what it is.
I think Dana White actually made a good point in speaking this week to Kevin Iole on Yahoo in that sit-down interview that they did on video, where he kind of blamed the staff of the UFC for not. Why did they let them do that? Like, why did they even let them get close to each other? That was
okay.
idea.
Let me jump, because in fairness, Jorge Masvidal walks over there with his hands behind his back, very casual. Like he did not look like he was about to throw a 3-piece with the soda. So if I'm just watching it, I wouldn't have expected that either. If I'm UFC staff, I saw a tweet on Saturday where
I want to be as confident in regular life as Jorge Masvidal is, walking with his hands behind his back into a crowd of a potential fight coming up against some other dude's team, going right up to them with his hands behind his back, just sauntering over like a lazy Sunday at the park.
Jesus.
What a guy.
Well, hey, let's keep moving. We got too much to discuss, and we're running out of time. Next question is coming from Lucian on the MMA Fighting page. Wants to know about covering the Tony Ferguson issue. Delightful days for you both. God, I love the intros, man. When the news about Tony Ferguson broke last week, I happened to notice that it took much longer for it to hit MMA Fighting than a lot of other news sites I follow. This is not a criticism, as I assume it is a product of the difficulty of what the incidents deal with, but it did make me curious on how you handle covering a very delicate issue like this. Are there more thorough considerations or checks before publishing it? And if I may ask a bonus question on the subject, Ferguson has always been seen as a slightly offbeat dude, but now do you reflect differently on his behaviors and in interactions that you did or than you did before this news? If this is a sore subject for you as an alternative, I would love to hear your thoughts on the parliamentary rule from the 7th century used to prevent the third British Parliament Brexit vote this month. I don't know that I have a lot of thoughts on that last part, but
Marc, get a Brexit question on the A side.
I know, but Marc, Tony Ferguson situation, obviously this is a rough one. We did have this story up later than most of the other websites in the space. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago about sourcing and being correct and having all the information before going to publish. I never want to be in a rush, especially with something like this, man. This is a really, really sensitive topic. This is a really sensitive topic, and also paramount to me. And this is something that I want to get across and keep popping into my head as being significant is that he has not been arrested. He has not been charged with a crime. That's very, very important, and that's one of the reasons why we acted, I guess, so slowly and cautiously with this, because he wasn't arrested. I mean, that he's not being charged with a crime. He's not facing any kind of criminal action. If that is the case, that is always a cause to write something. So it's because that was not in the picture in the story. It was a question as do we even write this? This is a personal matter, and I had heard. I mean, look, it was tweeted by Jeff Sherwood, right, a week before things came out about a disturbance at Tony Ferguson's place. At his residence, and I did follow up on it at the time, and I did find out some information, but I didn't follow through with that information. I didn't publish anything because there was no criminal charge. There was no criminal act found by police. So that's not a story. That's a private matter at that point, right? So it obviously changed when Tony's wife Christina filed for a domestic violence restraining order last week, and that's when it started to become a story that I was comfortable reporting on, because it wasn't a criminal act and it wasn't a criminal charge, but it was a court act, which we've written about before. But MMA Junkie, they did a great job in getting that story out. They had it all laid out with other information from the Santa Ana police incident report that happened. We did not have all that stuff, and until I got everything that I needed from all those places, I was not comfortable writing about it, and that's pretty much how it goes. And another thing that I want to point out too is that this is a very different situation than others that we've seen in the past with domestic violence, and a lot of headlines, including ours, initially said domestic violence, and that is what the restraining order is. It's domestic violence restraining order. But just to be completely clear for people who haven't read the whole story, Tony Ferguson is not being accused of hitting his wife. He's not being accused of being abusive in that way toward his wife and his son. This is really more of a thing where his wife believes he needs help. He's having some what she says is delusions and paranoia, and it's not a question of him hitting her or doing anything like that. There's no record of that at all. It's more about her having a little bit of a fear for some of the episodes, I guess, that he's been having, which I mean, I wrote about it a lot last week. I don't want to go too much into it because then it's a very sensitive issue, but she feels like he's a danger to himself and others because of some of the episodes that he's had lately. I guess she feels like he needs some kind of psychiatric help. And Tony posted yesterday that he went to go see a psychologist, and it seems like he is trying to get the help that he needs, which I think is fantastic news.
Yeah, and he also noted earlier in the week that the UFC is helping him out get all the help that he needs. And I mean, I'll just address this on a personal note, because obviously I've been someone who has been one of Tony Ferguson's biggest supporters in the media for years at this point. I think for maybe 3 years now, I've been saying he's probably the best guy in the world, in my opinion, at 155 pounds. Talked to him a lot of different times over this span. And this is rough news, man. This is really troubling situation. It's not what you want to hear. And it makes sense to some degree now. I mean, it makes sense to a lot of degrees now why Dustin Poirier is fighting Max Holloway for this lightweight division. And it also, I guess, brings, I don't want to even say it like this, but it brings some level of clarity to this lightweight division at the moment, where maybe Tony Ferguson was the odd man out. But man, you just really, really hope that he is able to deal with these issues, get past them, and get past them safely, because some of the problems detailed there were very troubling when it comes to just paranoia and things like that. I mean, this is a man who has taken a lot of shots to the head over the course of his career. I mean, I think there's a lot unexplored there and a lot unknown there. Just in regards to it all, it just seems like a very difficult situation, and you feel for everybody involved. I mean, nobody wants to hear anything like this. The good thing, though, is that it does seem as though there are a lot of people around Tony that love him very much and want him to get better and are pushing him to get better. So that is good.
Yeah, and there are a number of things in if you're only reading the headline, you're not getting the full story when it comes to this. And Christina Ferguson's not even filing for divorce against Tony Ferguson. She is just simply saying, and she wrote in her statement, he's a good husband, he's a good father, but he's having some issues right now that he needs to address. And that's really her goal as far as this restraining order goes. It's really just something to compel him to get the help that she believes that he needs. And hopefully it goes well. And look, Tony Ferguson is one of the best fighters on the planet. He's one of the more interesting personalities on the planet. He's a fan favorite. His fighting style is one of the most exciting in UFC history, I would say. I think everyone across the board, this is an easy one for journalists, and even if you're being objective, everyone wants to see Tony Ferguson get the help he needs, get back, beat this thing and get back to the El Cucuy that everyone enjoys watching so much. I think that's across the board. We can, even if you look at his comments, and we know social media can be horrible, but most of the comments on his social media have been really positive lately, and I really love that. And this is not a bad guy. This is not a guy who is doing bad things. It's a guy that maybe just needs some help, and I hope he's getting it.
Yeah, and he always has been a very nuanced person, a very unique person. And I think that this sort of, now that these details have come to light, I wonder if this has probably made a lot of people sort of rethink a lot of the interactions Tony Ferguson has had over the past several years. I mean, he's a weird guy, but I always enjoyed his weirdness. Other people maybe made light of it or made fun of it. I think maybe that's being rethought in retrospect. But hey, man, we just hope he gets better and he gets the help he needs and everything is okay, because this is a super, super unfortunate situation for really one of the greatest lightweights we've ever seen in this sport.
Yeah, the UFC is not as good as it can be without Tony Ferguson there being Tony Ferguson, I would say.
Well said. Well, hey, let's keep things moving. You want to get the next one?
Yeah, sure. The next one is coming from Philosophical Perspective, and there's a lot of stuff here.
Do you want to? We just kind of addressed that. Do you want to skip to?
Probably skip this one. The next one is also from the same person, Philosophical Perspective. It's about the UFC Nashville main event this coming weekend between Anthony Pettis and Wonderboy Thompson. How do you see Pettis' path to victory over Wonderboy? I cannot. I started following striking in the 80s, and we do have two very competent strikers here, but I cannot see Pettis standing the slightest chance here. So I'm interested if you give Pettis any chance, and in that case, how he can win over one of the best strikers in the UFC who is so much bigger. Cheers from Sweden.
Is that you throwing it to me? There was no question.
Yeah. So what do you think? I thought I lost you there for a second again. So what do you think? What is Anthony Pettis' path to victory? Is there one against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson?
I mean, I gotta admit, man, I when this fight came out and it was announced that this was the booking, I didn't think it made a lot of sense then. I still don't really understand why it makes a lot of sense now. Maybe I mean, I understand the welterweight division has changed significantly with Tyron Woodley's loss to Kamaru Usman. Suddenly, Wonderboy Thompson is not in the Joseph Benavidez area that he used to be in, or the Cody Garbrandt area where you've lost to the champion. And you're not finding your way back. There's definitely a path now there for Wonderboy Thompson. I wonder if he maybe wishes he would have taken a different fight or something like that. But I get it for Anthony Pettis. I mean, it's another restart for him. He has done this several times now over the last several years. I don't know that 170 is the right division for him at all. I mean, you look at his Instagram and he's looking pretty big. I will say he's looking like a big dude right now. And it has gotten it's weird for him because he was somebody when WEC was still around, he was making lightweight like it was nothing. Like he was barely cutting any weight. And then he tried that featherweight experiment. That kind of messed with his body really badly. And ever since then, it seems like it's been really difficult for him to make 155. Like he is coming in at 156. He's using the towel, etc. Maybe 170, he feels like it's the natural progression for him. I don't know. That's a division with a lot of really, really big, strong, grinding wrestlers. I don't know that's going to serve Anthony Pettis well. It is a matchup, though. I mean, karate striker versus effectively Taekwondo striker. I think Anthony Pettis, his best path to victory, though, might actually be his grappling, which is a weird thing to say when you talk about Anthony Pettis. He is always such an underrated grappler, and his ability in scrambles to catch submissions, I think, is among the best in the sport. I don't know that he has the takedown abilities to be able to get Stephen Thompson down, but if there are some kind of scramble that develops, that might seem like Anthony Pettis' best path to victory. But hey, who knows? Maybe he is, like I said, he is looking like a big dude right now. Maybe he comes out in 170 and he feels like he has some power that he didn't have at 155, and he's able to put more force behind those kicks and really surprise us. At this point, who would be stunned with anything, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you about that being the path of victory for Pettis. His scrambling ability and his ability to catch submissions in transition is incredible, and we've seen it time and time again against guys who some would say they're better grapplers maybe than Anthony Pettis, but he's been able to submit them because he's so he just has that ingenuity in all situations on the ground when it's a scramble, especially. Could he get that against Stephen Thompson? Maybe. Could he outstrike him? I don't know enough about Anthony Pettis at 170. Like you said, I'm very curious to see where it is. And to your point, I don't think he goes up if the opponent was one of those wrestlers. I don't think that was going to be the path for him. If they offered him someone who is a huge wrestler who cuts a lot of weight to 170, I don't think Pettis is making that move to 170. I think he stays at 155. But Thompson is a striker, and they're probably, I mean, you would think there wouldn't be too much wrestling in that fight, but you never know. But I'm curious to see it. I don't know if it makes sense, but on paper, it sounds like it could be pretty interesting. It could be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, this fight alone as a one-off is very fascinating, but you just look at like the top 6 at welterweight. It seems like a nightmare type of division for Anthony Pettis, man. You got Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, Tyron Woodley, and Rafael Dos Anjos, and Ben Askren, who all have that ability to wrestle really incredibly hard and grind you out. And that has been proven over and over again to be Anthony Pettis' kryptonite. I don't know that there's that there's a very high ceiling for Anthony Pettis at 170, but if he felt like 155 wasn't working out for him anymore, it'd be interesting to watch him try it.
Yeah, 100%. It's his choice in the end. Moving on to from the MMA fighting comments, life is kicking my butt. That is the user. All right, I feel you. I'm with you. Good day, gentlemen. What do you think of Iaquinta versus Cerrone, and whom will the UFC throw at McGregor now for a quote-unquote rebound, read easy victory? Let me just say one thing about Iaquinta versus Cowboy Cerrone, which I like that matchup a whole lot, but it's happening in Ottawa. It just doesn't make. It's like I love the fight, and I don't care where it is, and I'll watch it. But man, nothing says Canada's capital like Raging Al versus Cowboy Cerrone. I mean, come on, it just doesn't make. I mean, these guys are America to the hilt, and it's gonna happen in freaking Ottawa of all places. It just makes me laugh.
If you ever needed a more quintessential example of, hey, there's a spot to fill in the calendar, let's throw this fight.
Yeah.
It's this
we
one.
have a good fight. It was an open main event. All right, let's do Cowboy versus Raging Al in freaking Ottawa. Why the hell not?
I mean, just as a fight itself, I liked the fight a lot. It was obvious that they were trying to do Conor versus Cowboy and that wasn't going to materialize anytime soon. It seems like maybe Conor is angling for July if he does fight. I would still be surprised if that happens. I don't think that's going to happen, but who knows? As the fight itself, I mean, they're both entertaining dudes. I don't know. There will be a lot of trash talk. They seem to respect each other very much. I think this will be a relatively respectful lead up compared to others that these guys have had. But that is an aggressive fight once the actual day comes. I am looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I love that fight a lot, and I don't care. Again, I don't care where it is. It just made me laugh. But on paper, it's a great fight. It has significance in the division. It's really great across the board. I always kind of had my doubts about the Conor Cowboy fight. I always kind of knew that it was tenuous at best about whether it would happen or not. I'm also going to say one other thing, Shaun, that I didn't mention before. I think that this new ESPN situation, ESPN Plus and pay-per-view, it could act as a little bit of a roadblock in getting McGregor back into the cage. I really do.
100%. 100%. You talking about the pay-per-view switch?
Exactly. Yeah, pay-per-view, because again, he made the bulk of his money on the back end of his pay-per-view share, and that will almost certainly go down in some ways, and it could go down a huge amount depending on how much the UFC actually makes now on the back end. And I think there's going to be some negotiation. There's going to have to be some heavy negotiating with him in the UFC. He said in Chicago, and this is before this even came out, he said in Chicago over the weekend, which our friend Mike Pendleton captured for BJPenn.com, that he wanted his fair share in the UFC if they were going to put him in a co-main event. So he's already kind of thinking about this negotiation, and I don't think it's going to be easy. And by the same token, Nate Diaz too, if that is the fight they're going to do next, if they're going to do the trilogy fight, those guys are hard negotiators. That's going to be a very tough fight to put together, especially when there seems to be less money coming back to them on the back end now with this new deal.
Yeah. Well, hey, that is it for the MMA fighting comment section. We have already run out of time, but screw it. Let's go long today because we have not even touched Twitter, and we have a ton of Twitter questions. So we'll try to get to as many of those as possible, probably rapid fire them. You got anything immediately as I start to look through this?
Someone.
I just saw what you said.
From Michael J. Orvieto, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, and middleweight all have champion issues. Flyweight might too if Cejudo wants to move up. Heavyweight is also in a weird spot with DC waiting for a fight. What does the UFC need to do to give us some active defending champs? I mean, stop putting together a champ versus champ. I guess that would be one immediate solution.
That would be a damn good solution.
I mean, that would be a good start.
I mean, all these divisions are so log jammed at this point. It is, we have talked about it ad nauseum, but it is just so endlessly frustrating for me to watch at this point. I don't know that I have a solution.
There's not a great one. There's not a great.
You just got to get these fights rolling. Just stop waiting for stuff like the DC Brock type of stuff. Like you just get these fights going.
I wonder if, because now there isn't going to be as much of a premium put on trying to sell those big pay-per-views because they've already kind of sold them to ESPN and they're getting that money already. Will that mean less champ versus champ fights? Because they'll stop trying to chase those big, short-term paydays because they've already made their ESPN money on pay-per-view, so they can just kind of go on with divisions in a more, I guess, coherent manner. I don't know. That's just speculation, but maybe.
Yeah. Well, I got one here from Mystic Mike 91. Who says, got some fantasy matchups for you guys, and I think you'll like these ones. I like that setup. So let me hit you with these rapid fire, Marc.
Be the judge of that, Mystic Mike.
I'll hit you with these rapid fire. You just give me a quick answer who you would pick.
Oh, is that we're doing picks now? All right.
I mean, what am I going to just list these off and you'd be like, yeah, I like that one.
I was hoping.
Jorge Masvidal versus Max Holloway at lightweight.
Well, Jorge Masvidal is never going back to lightweight. He said it on Twitter the other day. He's never going back there. So it's not going to happen. If it did happen, I guess I would pick Holloway, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I would go Holloway just because you're getting a diminished Jorge Masvidal at that point. Habib versus Maya at welterweight, which has always been one of my sneaky dream fights. I would just love to see that so much.
Habib.
I agree, Habib, but I think that would just be fun. That would be so fun to watch.
What about Masvidal's hair? Man, what a head of hair that man has. Jeez, couldn't do that. Couldn't do that at lightweight. Sorry, that's a little bit of a tangent, but
yeah, where did that come from?
I don't know. Maybe he is the hottest fighter at welterweight. I don't know. Nice head of hair.
Just gonna let that linger. Number 3, Brian Ortega versus Crone Gracie. Wow, you just throwing Crone into the deep end.
What? Ortega.
Yeah, I'll take Ortega, but Ice Cream Crone may get there sooner than we thought. Daniel Cormier versus Daniel Cormier versus Yoel Romero at light heavyweight. I never want to see Daniel fight at light heavyweight again, so I'm not even going to answer this.
Probably Cormier, but yeah, I don't think Cormier is going to 205 ever again. I mean, I would say he's definitely never going to 205 again. I can't imagine he would.
Jose Aldo versus Al Iaquinta. I'm assuming this would be at lightweight.
That's pretty random. Al Iaquinta.
I go Aldo.
Al Iaquinta.
I go Aldo, but that'd be a good one.
It would be a good one.
And last one for this question, Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Sean O'Malley. There would be so much spinning shit and flying kicks and crazy kicks in that fight. It would be wild.
I'll go with Zabit probably, but will be fun.
Yeah, I would go Zabit if it's today. Maybe 2 years, a year from now, once Sean's gotten a little bit more under his belt. Maybe this is a different conversation, but I think right now you're probably going Zabit.
Hopefully we'll get to see O'Malley back at some point.
Agreed. Yeah.
He had all that momentum. It's a shame.
You got a question?
Plus he's a bantamweight and Zabit is featherweight, so Zabit will be bigger.
Oh, I got a good one here.
Yeah,
this one's coming from Brian Uhl, who wants to know, and this is just in reference to Luke Rockhold's the announcement of Luke Rockhold versus Jan Blachowicz from Brett Okamoto.
Okamoto, yeah.
Yeah. How many fights will Luke Rockhold need to win to get a title shot at 205? Also, if he loses to Jan Blachowicz in July, especially if it's by KO, should he consider hanging it up? So this is something me and you have been calling for a long time, for Luke Rockhold to finally make that move at 205. It appears that it's finally in place. I don't know if we haven't confirmed that fight yet, so
we have not.
That is not official, but that seems to be the direction the UFC wants to go.
Yep.
What do you think of that fight?
I'm interested. I mean, I like Rockhold at 205. I'm glad he's going there finally. It's not the sexiest fight in the world. Jan Blachowicz is a very good fighter, but certainly not like one of the bigger names in the division, although he's one of the top contenders in the division. If you're asking how many fights, how many wins to get the title, not many.
Might just be one.
Not many. It might
just be one.
I mean, I think that if Rockhold wins that fight in impressive fashion, there'll be people clamoring for him against Jon Jones. I do believe that. And
the storyline's already there. Yeah. The storyline is there. It is built in. Luke Rockhold, lifelong friend of Daniel Cormier, someone who was right there cage side for all of the Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones fights, saw his friend get knocked out with a head kick. That is an incredible story. If Luke Rockhold wins against Jan, I'll throw him right in there. I mean, I feel like you need to keep just feeding Jon. Jon wants to keep active this year. Let's get as many Jon Jones fights as possible, and don't throw Johnny Walker in there yet. Like, let some of these young guys, like a Dominic Reyes, like a Johnny Walker, develop still. Luke Rockhold is very much a finished product. Those two guys, let him get a few more fights. We saw against Volkan this past weekend. Dominic Reyes is not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I really can't answer the question about if he loses or by knockout, because we just don't know. And I wouldn't advocate for Luke Rockhold hanging it up. I mean, certainly I haven't seen the fight, so I can't really comment on what what he should do.
I actually last thing I'll add on this. I think that the move to 205 will be greatly beneficial to his ability to take a shot. Because we saw at the end of his middleweight run, he was so sucked out. That weight cut was getting so difficult for him. When your head is going in there with no water in it, it is easy to knock yourself out. As we saw it against TJ Dillashaw, it doesn't take much when you're so dehydrated. I think the move up will, if anything, help his ability to take that shot.
I completely agree, 100%. I think that's it, right? Anything else?
I'm looking. A lot of these we have already hit.
Yeah.
Here, let's do this. Is the last one. This is coming from John Spear, who wants to know what would be your nicknames and weight classes if you fought in the UFC. Marc Raimondi, Marundi.
Marundi. Marundi would be my
Is that
nickname.
it?
Yeah, I don't really have another nickname.
Marc Marundi Raimondi would be the hardest thing Bruce Buffer has ever had to say.
It would be awful. It would really be awful. I don't know. I don't really have a nickname. My weight class, that's a good question. I haven't weighed myself recently, but the last time I did, I was in the 160s. So maybe
I don't know that you're in your peak physical fitness right now, though.
I'm definitely not in my peak physical fitness. I'm definitely bulking right now. Definitely heavier than I've been. I think I'm heavier than I've ever been in my entire life.
You're cultivating mass.
I certainly am. In both ways. I'm eating well, but I'm also putting on some muscle. I don't know, maybe 145 right now, but I'm probably short for 145. So I would probably say if I'm really training for a fight, I would probably be like 135 or maybe even 125. Maybe.
God, that would be a terrible weight cut for you.
That would suck. But I mean, I've been like in the mid like 130s before.
I think because I've thought about this a lot, because I think before I get too old, I want to do one sort of amateur fight or a professional fight to some degree. Yeah, that's always been something I've wanted to do.
Let's get that going. That could be a good video.
I mean, I come from a boxing background, so like boxing was taken away from me because I had a brain injury. So like I still would just want to get that one in to just be able to do it. You know, I trained kickboxing, I trained jujitsu. Like
with a brain injury.
Well, that was a long time ago. It's been a long time since. But so I've thought about this a lot. I think
you may have to go commission shopping for this one, Al-Shatti.
How dare you? Don't be a narc. Don't be a narc, Money.
You just said it publicly in front of our tens of viewers.
My weight hovers around 190 to 200, depending on whether I've been going to the gym. So I think like 170, but probably 185, because I don't know that I would be willing to do that weight cut. I'm like 6'1", like I'm fine for 185. I don't know that I would particularly need to cut more than that. And a nickname. I've never thought about a nickname. I guess I would go for something that rhymed. So the first thing that comes off the top of my head would be Shaheen the Dream Al-Shatti.
That doesn't rhyme.
It's like a slant rhyme.
It doesn't rhyme.
It's a slant rhyme. It works. It rolls off the tongue.
That's not even a thing. You made that up.
Look, Marundi, you didn't even give one. All right.
No, you said it. Marc the Narc. That's my nickname.
Oh, there you go. I like that. Well, hey, I think that's about all the time we have today. Let's do the promo and then we can get out of here. Marc, you want to go first? Or you want me to go?
Yeah, I'll go first. Screw it.
You sound excited. You sound so excited. You're getting me excited.
You're the one who brings the energy here. I bring it down. We have our roles. We know this already. So this may be, unfortunately, the last A-side that we do for a few weeks. We may miss the next 2 weeks, and next week there is a decent reason why I will not be in front of my computer at this time. Although I'm leaving it open. I don't know yet. Maybe I will.
I was gonna say I don't know that we've decided that yet, but okay.
We'll see. We'll see. I could do it, but next week I will be in Tokyo. I will be going to the One Championship, a New Era card, which is going to be held at Sumo Hall in Tokyo on March. It'll be March 31st in Japan. It'll be like the night of March 30th, I guess, for the States and for Canada, for North America. And then it'll be at some point for the UK and you guys over there in Europe. I don't know the time zones. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a very good card. And I would argue that it'll probably be the best, the most loaded, the most stacked non-UFC card of the year, almost certainly, and it's almost certainly the biggest one championship card they've ever put together. I mean, it is loaded with big names from North America and from Asia. It's of course headlined by Shinya Aoki versus Edward Folayang for the one lightweight title. And then, of course, Eddie Alvarez makes his debut for one, the former UFC lightweight champion, former flyweight champion in the UFC, Demetrius Johnson, makes his one debut, and they're in their respective divisions, Grand Prix tournaments. It's not a one-night tournament, but this is the quarterfinals of both their tournaments. And then there's also other big names like Angela Lee, who's defending her strawweight world title for one, and Bibiana Fernandez, who is still one of the best 135, 145 pounders in the world. I would say Gary Tonin, who's jiu-jitsu ace, who's having a great start his MMA career. All of these names are on this card, and it's really good, and I'm pretty psyched about it, man. I think it's going to be really fun. There's even some kickboxing on the card too, mixed in. There's a lot of fights, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm pretty psyched for it. And also, Tokyo is awesome. Tokyo's so cool.
And you forgot to mention that the following week there won't be a show because you're just going on vacation again.
You say that with such disdain.
I'm just saying,
just going
we're
on
3 months into 2019, and you are on 2 vacations, and I'm on 0. Just saying.
Look, man, I deserve my vacation time. Also, I didn't take vacation for almost 2 years, like a real vacation for 2 years. So I am due. Also, we get unlimited paid time off at MMA Fighting, so I can take vacation whenever I damn well please, and I will. But as far as next week, maybe we'll still do the A side. I'll have to do it. It'll be 2 in the morning, I think, in Tokyo.
I think we should do it. I think people want.
I don't know how good my internet's gonna be in Tokyo though. That's the thing.
Excuses.
We'll try. Well, I'll try. Okay, I'll give it the old college try at 2 in the morning.
All right.
I'll fill up on some vending machine coffee. I don't know. And then the next week I'll be in New York for WrestleMania week. That'll be fun.
Shameful.
It'll be fun.
Shameful.
I won't actually be going to WrestleMania though. I'll be going to all the other shows, but not WrestleMania.
Well, hey, that was about a 5-minute promo, and we're already out of time. So I'm going to go
very promo now. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut into your time.
I'm going to go very quickly with mine. So this isn't a 2-hour show.
Dream.
Excuse me?
What? Oh, sorry. That was supposed to be my inner voice.
So just really quickly, I want to talk about something that's kind of slipped through the cracks of what turned out to be really a wild weekend at London. And I won't fault anybody for already forgetting this, but Michael Bisping, man, Michael Bisping is now a UFC Hall of Famer, or he will be very soon. And I just want to salute the man, the myth, the legend, the count, Michael Bisping, because what a incredible career he really had. I mean, we have some distance now from it. It's been about a year since he retired and he sort of moved away from the game more on the announcing side of it. And it is just crazy to look back at the road we went on with this guy. I mean, he is someone who was the original, who was one of the originals from one of the first Ultimate Fighters, and he lasted so long. And when he walked away, he held so many different records at the time of his departure. Most wins in UFC history, second most total fight time, easily the most fights in UFC history, even bad stuff like the most knockdowns suffered in UFC history. And I always say, and this is, I think, one of the more important aspects when we look at historical figures in this sport, longevity is its own skill. Like, longevity is an underrated thing when we examine greatness in any sport, but fighting in particular, where it is such a damaging sport physically. I mean, it's why you look at in basketball, a guy like LeBron James, who is still able to do this for so long. That is what makes his career so incredible. And Michael Bisping, man, truly had one of the most remarkable, fascinating, and by the end of it, storybook careers that we will ever see in this sport. What he did in his last chapter, in his final chapter of clawing back from nothing at the very end, tail end of his career, far past his prime, that is the stuff that dreams are made of. If his story played out in a movie that we were just watching, we would fault Hollywood for being too unrealistic. So I just want to salute Michael Bisping, former UFC champion, always will be a UFC middleweight champion. He did it. No one thought he could do it. He is now a Hall of Famer, and that is well-deserved. And, hey, I might have a little something on Michael Bisping later in the year that I've been working on and had to shelf for 2 years now or a year now. That might come out later in the year for International Fight Week. Well, we will see. But, hey, kudos to you, Michael Bisping.
Well said, Shaun. Good stuff.
Hey, thanks.
I can't believe that got lost. It's a shame. That is a well-deserved honor for Michael, for sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, that about wraps it up here for us. This has been an extra long episode of the A-Side Live Chat Podcast. We had a lot to talk about. Thank you guys for bearing with us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the wonderful questions. We appreciate you all very much. Despite what Marc says, we'll try to figure out a show for you next week. He's going to power through it, wake up early, and go ahead and do it because he loves you all.
Stay up late.
Or stay up late. Yeah, that's good. Loopy Marc Raimondi is my favorite Marc Raimondi.
Should I do it from a karaoke bar?
What's that?
Should I do it from a karaoke bar?
I wouldn't say no.
All right. We'll see what we can do.
All right. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for joining us. Same time, same place next week. If not, we will let you know ahead of time. But we appreciate you guys. We love you. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week. And we will see you when we see you. Thank you again. A-Side.
A-Side.